A lot of you guys noticed the other day when I gave you time to explore topics about the Civil War that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation didn't exactly free the slaves. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what it did and what it did not do and why it's important. So, I'm going to try to give you a little introduction and background information before you do your lesson today. So, when Lincoln is elected president, he believes that slavery is morally wrong. He doesn't believe that the North can survive half slave, half free, but at the same time, he also doesn't believe that as president, he has the constitutional right and that the Constitution allows him to end slavery. And so his primary goal in being when he's president is to keep the Union together. And so when they fight the war, that's his goal. The war is a goal to preserve the Union, to keep the Union together. And I have a quote here. He actually says, my paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. So his primary goal is to keep the Union together. But one of the great things about Lincoln is that he kind of goes on this continuum. He kind of starts here and he grows and he changes his mind and he kind of ends up over here. So as the war goes on, he adapts and he changes and he rethinks a lot of his ideas about slavery. And I don't have time to go through and into all that. But as you're fighting this war, slaves are property, considered property of Southern slave owners. So when you go into the South and you seize the property of the people you've just defeated, what you're getting is you're getting also their slaves. Their slaves are contraband. There's a couple different military acts. One allows seized slaves to be forever free. Another act, which I think is actually called the Military Act, allows slaves to join the Union Army as laborers, which means they can work digging trenches, carrying supplies, but they can't actually fight. So as we get into the fighting, Lincoln realizes that the war needs to be about a little bit more than just preserving the Union. The people are getting tired of casualties and fighting and all sorts of stuff. And it needs to have a bigger purpose. But at the same time, his purpose is still to keep the Union together. And so when he first makes his draft of the Emancipation Proclamation, he makes it and he gives the Southern states 100 days. And if they come back to the Union and stop fighting in 100 days, he will allow them to keep their slaves. Okay? Now, part of me thinks that he knew that this wasn't going to happen. So he does that. And of course, the South doesn't buy it. And so the fighting goes on. And on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation frees the slaves in the Southern states fighting against the Union. Not in the slave states that are still part of the Union. Because there are some states called border states that are where North and South touch, okay, along the border, that are slave states that have stayed in the Union. They did not become part of the Confederacy. And Lincoln does not want these states to become part of the Confederacy. So he kind of treads this careful balance between freeing the slaves in the South as a war measure because he knows that the slavery is part of what the South needs to kind of survive, and freeing their slaves will take that away from them. So he does it as a war effort to help speed the war along, and he does it that way so that it doesn't anger the states that have slaves that are still part of the Union. But it does do a couple really important things. The Emancipation Proclamation paves the way for slavery eventually being abolished. And when it's issued, they know that. They know that this is the first step that's going to lead to slavery being gone in the United States. And the other thing it does, which is really important, is it makes it so that African Americans can join the army, take up guns, and fight for their own freedom, for their own liberation. So about, I think, 200,000 African Americans will end up joining the Union Army and fighting for their freedom. And they have it so much worse than Union soldiers, because when Confederate soldiers see former slaves with guns coming at them in battle, they show them no mercy. No surrender, no mercy, and they go crazy on them when they see them in battle. And so, but the slaves still fight. Okay, they still go in there and they still fight for their freedom and they contribute to the war effort. And this Emancipation Proclamation will lead to the slaves eventually being freed in the 14th Amendment. So Lincoln couldn't free the slaves technically. There had to be an amendment to the Constitution. So once the war was over and the war was won, they started working on the 14th Amendment, which would actually free the slaves. Lincoln was assassinated in April of 1865. He did not get to see the creation and passing of the 14th Amendment. It was not passed until January of 1866, where all the slaves were officially freed